I had a hard time doing Catwalk. You know, I turned it down. It was like going to be like pretty good money, and I turned it down because I said I don't want to spend like these 5 critical years of my life doing a TV show that's a parody of my real life. MCA was a big record label, and they wanted to make a record contract with all of us so that Catwalk could, for 7 years, put out records. And I had a real life band, and I said I can't do that because my real life band is going to have a conflict, and you want exclusivity. I can't do that. And I'm like, what? To be a fake band? Like, you want me to sign a 7-year deal to be the Monkees, basically?
Did you grow up in Canada? Were you alive in the 90s? Did you love YTV? Yeah, you did.
Catwalk came from a really weird place. The story of Catwalk is very unusual. Like, it actually came from a guy named Adam Kidron, who was a producer for some really dope bands like in the 70s and 80s. He was a producer on Scritti Politti and like discovered Nina Cherry and did a lot of stuff with Wyclef. And he made up this, and he's a Londoner, like a hardcore serial entrepreneur, like maverick Londoner. Like, that guy was so maverick that sometimes I couldn't keep up with how crazy he got. And he made this pitch for a show that originally was like Kate Moss and Nick Kamen, who was like the big Levi's jeans model, Nina Cherry, the amazing singer of Buffalo Stance, and a couple of other like Londoners. And it was called Catwalk. And each of the characters was like an iconic archetypal sort of character. So like Atlas was Atlas, like this big, powerful dude. And Johnny Angel was my name originally. And then there was Daisy and Sierra, but each of them represented something. Like Sierra represented, you know, the vastness of whatever. And Daisy was like the sort of archetypal bohemian, hippie, nomadic girl. And they were more like symbolic characters, like comic book characters, than they were just people. We shot the demo for that in LA, in South Central, back in the days when South Central was like, you guys be careful about what colors you wear. And like, and we were 17 years old. And then it got picked up by a company called Franklin Waterman, who was making stuff like Full House, but also 21 Jump Street.
Okay.
So I was like, okay, it could go one way or the other. Like, it's either going to go Full House or it's going to go 21 Jump Street. And I remember being in a boardroom and they said, you guys are going to be so famous. And I was like, wow. And then we came back and we started shooting it in Toronto. Because of that, somehow they ended up recasting one person. There was a guy, this gorgeous like model guy from London named Leo Kamalo. He had a big mane of hair and freckles, and he was like this just amazing looking, just international looking kind of mix of everything. And he ended up not being able to do it. And they brought in my friend Paul Popowich to play Jesse instead. And so Jesse was a very different kind of character. And then a lot of things changed. But what was interesting was what remained. Like, on the surface, Catwalk is okay. It's a bunch of inner city kids from all walks of life, and they're kind of got a band for reasons that's, I guess the show explains like how these guys all ended up together. They're all sort of like lone wolves, and they all have something that is broken that they need to fix. And sort of by default, this family that they can't help but love and can't help but hate keeps them together. That's like, it's the one thing that they can understand. But what was interesting were the things that were hangovers from the original super high concept version of the show, like burning oil barrels, and the fact that Johnny drives this milk truck and Daisy carries milk bottles home. And it was kind of this like anachronistic 1950s world, but in like a super deep sci-fi future. And I don't know how many people really picked up on that, but on top of that, the whole show has got this bizarre like mafia current. Like Billy Kay and Tony Peeler and all these guys are like mobsters. Like, they're straight up mafia, and they are kind of like the people that run this weird parallel universe. I mean, has anybody ever asked like, where exactly does Catwalk happen? I mean, is it New York? Is it Chicago? Is it Baltimore? The actual answer is it was called Anytown, USA.
Oh,
That's
really?
where they live. Yeah, they basically live in this like parallel universe dome where this alternate reality is happening. This is true. Like this is the way that it was given to us. And then over the course of the 24 episodes that we shot, I mean, back to back, like we shot 24 episodes in 10 months. It just got more and more like it tried to root itself in something more practical. I mean, it still stayed freaking weird. Like that show was weird as hell. It doesn't make sense. And it doesn't even age very well. I don't think it aged well when it was happening because like, I'll tell you something about that too. There was this other thing going on called Boogie's Diner.
Okay.
And Boogie's Diner was an actual sitcom that was like very Full House. Like it's a diner. It's like being at Johnny Rockets and everybody's full of wit. And there was these weird kind of production partnerships between all of these entities. So Boogie's Diner was actually this cross fertilization of a product. So it was like an actual clothing chain at the time and restaurant. And the idea was like, oh, it'd be like a clothing chain and you eat there and you're just spending all your money in one place. True story. And it's even a TV show and a breakfast cereal. So we had to take all of our wardrobe from frickin' Boogie's Diner.
Okay.
And so the poor wardrobe people were trying to take something off of their rack and dress Johnny up to look as punk as possible. But, you know, basically, and that's why Jessie looks like she does. That's why Sierra's dressed like she is. They're dressed up in this like weird Boogie's Diner outfit in this weird parallel futuristic universe of sort of a post-apocalyptic 1950s redux. And the final deal was that Adam Kidron booked a big contract with Def Jam Records and Motown. And so he had access to the whole Motown catalog for us to use in the show. And that's why like the first half of that series, we're basically just doing these like nouveau R&B covers of Motown songs.
The best things in life are free, but you can give them to the birds and the bees. I want money.
Money makes the world go round.
I want money.
Money lost and money found.
I didn't realize that you and Paul were friends previous to that. How did you meet him and bring him into the fold? Did you think of him? Did you say, oh, this guy would be a great Jesse? Or were you like, dude,
No.
Hook me up?
I definitely didn't. Paul and I are very good friends. I love him a lot. But no, when he came out, I was like, oh, God, what are they doing to this show? Actually, I met Paul when I was 14. They brought 10 kids together to do a pilot about a band called Cutting Loose. They brought in 10 kids and they were going to eliminate 5 and end up with 5. So it was kind of like this weird like reality show before reality shows. Mm-hmm. And Paul was part of that group. And that's also where I met Keith White, who was on Degrassi, who ended up becoming the bass player for Blue Dog Picked in real life.
So gorgeous.
This is private property.
I was playing a show at Lee's Palace in Toronto with Blue Dog Picked. I had blue nail polish and mascara and like eyeshadow and this giant crazy pigtails, and I was wearing like dog training boots up to my knees, and I had this like green dress and this red leather jacket, and it was just like a whole thing. I mean, you have to remember at that time in 91 and 1990, there was no such thing as Marilyn Manson yet. There was no such thing as Radiohead. There was no Nirvana. Like this was before that. This was maybe Pixies and Jane's Addiction and like Butthole Surfers and Dirty Rotten Imbeciles and Dayglow Abortions and the Sex Pistols and like New Wave. And that's what kind of like what we were coming from. And then like the hangover of the 70s, like Pink Floyd or whatever. Anyway, so we're playing a show at Lee's Palace, and then they call me and they say, you have an audition tomorrow morning. I'm like, no, dude, I'm so like, I have no voice. I look like a dead doll. I got to go home. And they're like, just go. It's like for a music show. I go into the audition, and I mean, there's like bodybuilders. There's like people like, you know, work stretching on like the bars, like ballerinas and opera singers. I'm like, oh my God, what am I doing? Like, I have nothing prepared. I'm supposed to have a song ready, a dance number. I'm like, I don't know. So I walk into the room, and Adam is there, and he had a woman with him named Mitzi. And she asked me if I knew that I looked like a girl. I said, okay. And she said, do you have a song? And I was like, I could sing something a cappella. Like I could sing Terrence Trent D'Arby. So I sang Terrence Trent D'Arby, maybe poorly with my ragged voice. And then I did like a little hip hop dance, kind of like as a fuck you. And then I walked out, and then they called like a week later and they said they want to book you for this job. And I think it was just because Johnny was just, they wanted something that was real. And I really was like really living that life. I mean, I was playing and touring, and I didn't give a shit. And that's kind of what Johnny really was. He was like this broken, wayward soul who only lived by virtue of his music. The one thing I liked about that character in hindsight was that he only cared about his guitar. He was kind of like asexual in that show. Like he didn't care about chasing women or men or making anything but music. Like Watson was the only thing that mattered to him.
When you're telling me before about your audition, where you're like, you sang something, you thought you sounded like crap, you did a dance to take the piss out of it, and then you left. I'm like, that's almost word for word for Johnny Rotten's audition for the Sex Pistols. Almost word for word. How are the other cast members? Did you guys, like, I know you know Paul, but did the rest of you kind of bond through the process of this hysteria that was thrown upon you?
Lisa Butler, who played Sierra, was the only one who was really an import. She was from San Francisco, and she basically lived in an apartment that they put her up in Yorkville the entire time, and we barely ever got to see her. And I want to say, like, in hindsight, Lisa Butler is an amazing and enormous talent. Like, she legitimately sings like that, and that's rare. Like, people don't just sing like that.
I were your woman, and you were my man. You'd have no other woman. You'd be weak as a lamb.
No.
And it was completely not utilized correctly. I mean, this girl is going in and quickly throwing out these like vocals on songs that are just sort of like being whipped up every week and killing it, and nothing ever came of that. Like, she should have been a massive star. So she was like the real deal, but she came from fashion and modeling, and I think she still has like a makeup company now in San Francisco. Nev had never really done TV before. She had come from doing Phantom of the Opera at the theater, but had never done TV. Like, her brother was on Degrassi, Christian, but that was it. So this was like her first real moment. And she and I were friends because when I would go and hang out with the Degrassi kids, I wasn't on Degrassi and she wasn't on Degrassi, but she obviously was around too. So we would just sort of sit together and talk about whatever. And so we were really happy to be on that show together. Do you know that Billy Kay, that Joel Weiner, went on to become like one of Hollywood's biggest writers and producers?
No idea.
Yeah, look it up. He's like one of the key people behind that show Fringe.
Wow.
And like The Mexican, that's that guy.
Yeah.
So he went on to become like a massive like TV producer. Chris Clements, Atlas, sweetheart. Atlas originally was supposed to be much more of a rapper. Like, I'll tell you, whenever we were doing this stuff for Catwalk and we were lip syncing, whatever, they would just play CNC Music Factory as if that was like the default model for our sound. And if I ever hear that song again. But that's why, when you're watching the show, it's got this like ridiculous thing of Atlas is like sort of being like the hype man. And the joke was always like, what does Atlas do in this band?
Now this is my little Miss Mary. Only things are not so contrary. Killed her mind from too much sun. Wouldn't even call she was 911. Mary, Mary, what you doing?
he used to be much more of a rapper, and like CNC Music Factory always had like those little rap moments where they'd kind of come in and break up. That was that strange period in music where you had like things like De La Soul and Tribe Called Quest and all of these cool bands that were really fusing a lot of different styles, and like rap was kind of finding its way much more into the mainstream, and there was like the Bristol sound, and like there was just all these different kinds of things colliding together, and you didn't really know what it was or what it was called. I still don't know what that stuff is called. In order to try to find like some kind of analog for what Catwalk was, like CNC Music Factory was something like it. It's like there's boys, there's girls, they're from every walk of life, they're all colors, they're all styles, and somehow they all dance together and make like a groovy sound. So that's how that kind of played out. But I just watched the last episode of Catwalk today just to figure out what the hell we were talking about. And I was like, Catwalk wouldn't really be Catwalk without Atlas. Like, if you didn't have this guy up in the front getting the audience totally pumped and being like that hype man, it just would be like a funk band. And so I think that all the parts had to be there the way that they were.
When me and Melissa were watching, like every time Atlas was dancing, she's like, does this poor guy, how many takes did he have to do of all this dancing and stuff?
More importantly, how many boiled eggs did he have to eat every day?
Yeah.
He was always eating like 12 boiled eggs because he had to keep bulking up and bulking up. And, like most people bulk up for a minute and then they take a break, but he was always on camera. So the poor guy was just like protein loading all the time.
Well, that's the interesting thing. Like, if you watch the pilot right now and you watch the final episode, first of all, Billy Kay is like the #1 antagonist of the series, or so you would think. And Atlas is kind of the gateway between here's the bad guys that will become, the ally. And that all happens in the first episode. And in the first moment of the first episode, an act of defiance is what starts the band, because you won't play My Girl, which makes a lot of sense now because you had access to the Motown stuff.
Nothing you could do could make me be untrue to my girl. Whoa, nothing you
Well, yeah, and it was just that, like, Johnny just was, like, a rogue. And you have to remember that the guy that made the show, Adam, was a rogue. He was not there to, like, make you feel good at the end of each episode. He was there to, like, bust up the establishment. I mean, it was a pretty punk rock underpinning. But then you also had this kind of Hollywood influence trying to make it into much more of, like, a relatable characters, like more of a soap opera, more of like a weekly thing. And it just was not meant to be that show. And it's ultimately, I mean, there was definitely some tension between me and the local producers because I was probably difficult. Like I just wanted to go be playing with my band and I didn't really want to be doing this show. I just thought it was like a sellout thing to do. I mean, that was my perception of that. Now, I should be so lucky to have jobs like that come up ever again because it was fun. It was really a fun and crazy thing. But there was tension there. And in the end, the story would go that I said, I'm not doing this show anymore because this has become way too goopy. Like, it's just dumb. Like, these themes that we're talking about, boyfriends and girlfriends and breakups, and it's just silly. Whereas they might say that they let me go because, Johnny was too weird for mainstream and people didn't get it and, it just wasn't working out and whatever. So, yeah, that's kind of like where that ended. And then we were really surprised when there was like a new season that happened that didn't have Johnny, didn't have Daisy. I've never seen it. I don't know if anybody's ever seen it. I know that there was a big problem between the original creator and MTV, and there was like a problem and they all went to court and whatever. I had some really great friends on that second season, so I don't wish it any ill will, but they were just, innocent actors like caught up in this continuum.
When did people actually first start saying, dude, Catwalk? Like, did it take a few years?
Yeah. When we shot it, it wasn't on really TV for a while. And then it started, and YTV was just the local distributor for the syndicated show. So it was playing in like Australia, it was playing in San Francisco. It was just random, like who was picking it up. And it was really exciting to be like, holy crap, like this random show is now all over the States. It's not on any network. It's just sort of whoever finds it. And then I left. Like in 1996, I moved to LA for completely unrelated reasons, like strange, bizarre story. And I'd left the show and it went into rotation. Like YTV just, at the time, YTV wasn't really much of anything. Like it was kind of kids' cartoons and it was just finding its first steps. I mean, you would know better than anybody what was going on at YTV. I didn't. And then it just started to play in repeat for like 6 years. So that same 24 episodes just got seen over and over and over and over again. And it looked like I was constantly on TV, but I had no idea because it only played on YTV. So I'm in California and totally have no sense of what's going on. And to this day, I can go back to Canada and people will not know me from anything else I've done but Johnny Camden. And so I guess that repetition did a lot.
Well, something people do know you for, especially just, when hinting, because I knew this was going to happen, but I wanted this interview to happen so much that I didn't want to jinx it. So I wasn't saying, he's going to be on the show, just in case you're not, and I look like a liar or a jerk. So, but my girlfriend and I, we own a copy of Rock My World. That's another musical, dramatic thing you did, where you're also a guitar player, but this time you got to rock the fuck out and wear the eyeliner, have the colored hair. It's like everything Johnny wasn't allowed to be, and all of a sudden it was this explosion of that kind of side of you. Can you tell me about filming Rock My World? Because I'm a big fan of that movie.
To.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you should be a big fan of that movie because that movie was made by Sidney Furie, and Sidney Furie made an amazing movie called Lady Sings the Blues in the 70s, and is another total rogue. Like this guy was sort of exiled from Hollywood for just first of all, for standing up for women. When the casting room would be like, we're not going to cast her because she's got this kind of body or that kind of body. He's like, I'm out of here. I'm not going to deal with this kind of criteria for who we're hiring. But also, like, he just shot in this very old school auteur way. When we were filming Rock My World, which Global Heresy was the original script. It was written by a guy in England, and it was a vehicle for Sidney Furie to work with Peter O'Toole. In this movie plays the lord of this giant manor estate in, upper crust of England. And he's got this wife played by Joan Plowright, and she's a very proper kind of woman. She was the wife in real life of John Gielgud. And so these people come from enormous acting pedigree. And they wanted to basically say, what if the world's biggest band, who are a bunch of brats and entitled rock stars, rent out this house and record their new record there, and you see the collision of these two kind of cultures. On paper, that's okay, maybe that'll be funny. But what's amazing about it is that Sidney Furie likes to capture real moments. And so we filmed that movie on actual celluloid film. And a film camera, when you say, roll, goes, grrr, it's not like video. And he wanted to shoot every single person at the same time because everything was improv. He just wanted us to improv. So you had 6 film cameras going at the same time, and they're all going grrr. And basically we had to ADR the entire movie. But the amazing thing about it is all of the interactions between everybody are totally real. That's us just riffing and being totally real. And there was moments where we could not stop laughing and pull it back together. And you see some of those moments in the movie. You feel it. I don't know. It was a special movie. It's a special, weird, not a boardroom movie, not a studio film. It was made out of complete love. And I got to give out a huge props to Josh Joseph, who was the music supervisor, because he brought this killer sound from the UK. It was actually 5 or 6 different bands that we are singing as. There's this one band called A, and I played that A CD way long after I finished doing that movie. That band is incredible. There's a record called A versus Monkey Kong that it like reminds me of Ash or that kind of a band where it's sort of like, is it Smashing Pumpkins? Is it Soundgarden? Is it like something like Radiohead? It's hard to tell. With like these super hard backbone beats. And I loved it. I thought it was so badass that I was like, I'm just going to sing the shit out of this and play it. And we did. And it was all so authentic. Like that movie is very real.
My favorite song's the first one in the movie, I guess. It's where it's the one you're singing like again, 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 again. Well, it's interesting that you say that you guys, lip sang to a few different bands. The band itself was going through a transition because in the story, the bass player is missing, and you guys are starting to write new things. And the whole point of renting out this house in the middle of nowhere is that the record company can't, interfere with the creative process. So it's actually interesting that you're playing an old song by one band, but then you're playing a new song by another band. That transition actually makes complete sense because the band was becoming a new band with Alicia Silverstone's character as well. So yeah.
Yeah. And then you had this other like weird triangulation because the film is kind of appealing to the Peter O'Toole audience, but it's also appealing to the Alicia Silverstone audience, which are very, very different. And then you've got Martin, who is from, a very popular British dark comedy. And then you've got this rock band that's actually doing like really cool, actually cool rock stuff. Mm-hmm. And so it's like this weird spectrum of demographics that movie is playing to without really trying to play or pander to anybody at all.
Why are you trying anything? We are locked.
What is this about, Lit? This isn't about the music, is it?
I think you're afraid to admit it.
Admit what, Leo?
You like her.
She was with it, Lit. Shut up, Dave.
I'm just trying something.
You take every opportunity you have to take a solo.
I think Alicia's amazing. She's a fun, sweetheart person. She's very grounded. She's a very proactive person. She's able to handle every part of a production and is very professional. Her love for animals and her care and her messaging about that is deep. I think later on in her life, she kind of got a little bit ostracized for people thinking it was to the point of weirdness. But, she really believed that animals shouldn't be food and they shouldn't be jackets. And that was her thing. And I felt that too. I had a great old time with her. I mean, it was just like we really went out to a castle and fell in love and fought and we're in a band together. And what else can I say?
That's awesome.
Just everything you'd hope for and more.
That's awesome. You've been in so many good projects too. Like every time you pop up, I'm like, there he is. When I was watching the first season of 24, there he is. When I'm once watching the Punisher Warzone, there he is. So, as an actor, after all these years, you're still at it. You have your hand in so many projects. You have your hand in 3 worlds.
But I am not going to spend a lot of my time talking about the market or the valuation or the adoption rates, because what I tend to do at this early phase is try to convince people that we have to keep thinking as broadly as possible about an opportunity like this. How often does it come along that we get to shape an entirely new medium?
I built a robot, a simple robot to keep me company. It doesn't play games but likes to listen and never disagrees.
Does acting have the same effect on you that it did when you were a resistant teenager?
That's a great question. Acting has always been like a weird thing for me. I kind of grew up doing it before I even knew how to make a decision. Like I was 7, I was 4. Actually, I was 4 when I did my first like tap dancey thing. I played the Wizard in The Wizard of Oz. And then my mom was an experimental theater director. So I was at the St. Lawrence Center and she had done a piece called Becoming about being an immigrant into a new world, but it was all done very, very sort of abstract symbolically. Like she literally is in a world where there's like white faced people that move like trains and speak in vowel sounds that she can't understand. And she sort of turns into this butterfly and in this poncho and is like dancing around. And there was like strange statues and like Laurie Anderson like music. And that was like my world. And I was 6. And then at 7, I was playing Oliver in a dinner theater. And by 8 and 9, I was doing more of that. And then I was doing CBC radio drama. So there was no consistency to like where I grew up in acting. I didn't just go to like auditions to, you know, do episodic television. I had a really wild and strange range of experiences. And I also was going to a choir school that felt like Hogwarts, where it was like a private all boys choir school, but it was in the middle of downtown, total like drug infested area, like lots of poor homeless people that lived there and shelters. And there was like a lot of like gang stuff. And there was just like the hustle and bustle of downtown. And like, we're like, you know, going down in our little suits and ties and singing his words and music. And, but I learned Gregorian chant. I learned 20th century composition. I learned really, really interesting skill sets I couldn't have gotten anywhere else. So acting was like this thing that kind of modulated. It kind of came in and out. It wasn't like I want to be an actor. It was more like acting was this excuse that I had to be exposed to a radio recording studio and a Foley room and like to cathedrals and to like musical theater people and dinner theaters and cabarets and travel, all this bizarre and amazing stuff. And acting was just the door that let me go to those places. So I didn't act because I wanted to be an actor. I wanted to act because I wanted to go to these worlds. And so and this has always been like my attitude with everything. I'm kind of like, I really don't give a shit, which is terrible because I really, 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 really do care about, I really care about people, and I really care about their heart, and I really care about their experience going through this life that they get, and that it sparks and that it's awake and that they just wake up for a minute and go, wow, like this is happening and I'm actually in this thing. And if that's all that happens, and if in some way I can do a thing for that person who doesn't quite remember that and it helps to re-spark them, then that's all I ever hoped to give back. But I don't care.
You're kind of doing that right now, to be honest.
I hope. I mean, that's what I hope, right? I've always thought about that. So the point I was making about not caring is like, when it came down to doing a role, I would rather say, I will wait it out for like a really wicked role in a really wicked project than to have a whole career cluttered with a bunch of noisy, bubblegummy, meaningless junk. Because then when that's finally strung together at the end, you'll get to see that I was trying to make a point, and that will stand for something and not just a busy acting career. Again, not a good financial kind of decision to make, but I really did kind of gun for really unique and interesting and edgy and you know, I mean, you never know how a project's going to turn out. With a movie, you could have the best intentions and it turns out as a disaster. On the other hand, I remember seeing a script for this thing called American History X, and I was like, oh man, I don't know about this. Like, I don't know how I feel about making a movie about neo-Nazis and like how that's going to like put them front and center and kind of make them like the protagonists of the film. And if this isn't done correctly, this could backfire and create a rallying point. And I had like really grave concerns. But that project was instrumental in me getting to work in California. And I thought, when I saw who the director was, and I was like, this guy is a bit of a rogue. And he kind of reminded me of Adam Kidron, Tony Kaye. And I thought, you know, they're not just phoning this in. Like, this guy really, really is thinking hard about this. And interestingly, the way that Tony Kaye shot American History X was the same way that Sidney Furie shot Rock My World, which was turn all the cameras on and just let them roll until the film is flapping at the end. Because even if you've got way, way too much footage, they wanted to see what happened beyond the scripted moment. And that was an insane education for me. So that was all by the time I was 20. So by the time I was 20, I'd already had these like extraordinary experiences. I felt pretty good about that, you know? And then 24 was lucky break. But I think also like the thing that played to my favor was once you have been sort of doing these weird roles and these interesting projects, then people think about you for interesting roles and interesting projects. Like there's no way I would ever be brought in on an audition to play the dad or the main, you know, the main guy in the main rom-com. Like I get brought in to play villains, psychopaths, aliens, you know, cannon fodder, whatever the case may be. And I'm good. Like if I can be like Nicolas Cage or Peter Stormare or, you know, any of the great kind of character actors, that would be an amazing gift.
Do you remember filming on Punisher Warzone?
Oh, yeah.
What was that? Go check it out. The fuck you waiting for, Christmas?
Punisher Warzone was a dream.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, I auditioned for it in Toronto. I was brought in to play to read for the character Ink, who was like a super skinny, like coked out, gothic flunky type. And I just played him like Tim Roth in the movie The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover, where Tim Roth is kind of like this like flunky, and he's just always throwing up because they're overfeeding him. And I thought of Ink as like this poor, besieged, tragic character. And Lexi Alexander, she really liked it. She thought my take was unique, brought me in, and I was like, oh shit, like the Punisher is my favorite Marvel character because he's just a person and he's such a weird enigma and he's such a clear and obvious anti-hero. I mean, it's not that he shoots guns at all. It's just that he's such a postmodern weird character. It's like, why is this guy even hanging out with Spider-Man and Superman? He's just so vengeful. Yeah, everybody on that set was amazing. I loved them all. They were great. There was no chaos. It was a perfect shoot. Steve Gaynor, who was the cameraman, the DP, was lighting it like Blade Runner. And that was like super exciting for me to see like the xenon arc lights and all of the color palette. If you ever want to shoot movies, look up Jordan Cronenweth because he will teach you so much about lighting. And I want to point out, while I'm on the subject of cinematography and lighting, the guy, Rick, I have to remember his full name, but Rick, who shot Catwalk, who lit Catwalk, was another kind of master of lighting. He would use, because he had so many characters and he had these huge warehouse spaces and clubs and stuff he always had to shoot, he did not do like directed lighting. Everything was bounce. Everything was diffusion. He had these massive bounces of light that would just put this beautiful, soft roll-off light on everybody, which is not typical for television. So you had a much more moody kind of a look. And I think that, you know, in a very subconscious way, helped to add to Catwalk's weird texture that it had. But he was a really brilliant DP. But that's not to say that Catwalk had a huge budget, but Catwalk had a very, very acute style look, and it was very cinematically approached. Garish, terrible 80s looks, but inside of this very cinematic look. And I credit Rick and also the directors were amazing. Like every episode had a different director, and a lot of those directors have won awards and they've gone on to make very important TV shows. Jerry Ciccariti, who did some of the key episodes, like that guy always had skull rings and a leather jacket, and he went on to be like the key guy on Schitt's Creek and a bunch of other like pretty popular shows. But Jerry, he was a punk and he brought a lot of flair to the look of that show.
Awesome, man. Would you mind if I ask you a couple of fan questions?
Go ahead.
Check out more episodes of You, Me, and YTV on Facebook and YouTube. Sweet one-of-a-kind interviews with PJ Fresh Bill, PJ Paul, Tarzan Dan, the cast of Student Bodies, the voice acting cast of Sailor Moon, and much, much more. Exclusively on You, Me, and YTV. Season 2.